All right, so
Now that I'm old enough to understand what the math he's teaching, so I just sit there and look at all the students like, hey, I'm a new student.
we were talking about the first stage of the light reactions and how the pigments like chlorophyll absorb light energy and how the electrons get excited and in an isolated solution of chlorophyll, those electrons drop back down and produce fluorescence and heat. And we talked about how our plants don't fluoresce when this happens. And so we talked about then that when the electrons get excited for plants, what doesn't happen is they don't drop back down to the ground state, which is what produces the heat and light. So they become excited, and there's a molecule called the primary electron acceptor that takes the electrons so that they don't drop back down into the chlorophyll. So chlorophyll, to understand this a little bit more, is part of what we call a photosystem. The photosystem in the center has a reaction center surrounded by light harvesting complexes. Light harvesting, what absorbs the light in a plant? The pigments, right? And chlorophyll is one type of pigment. And so around this reaction center, we're going to have a bunch of pigments to absorb the light. So the light harvesting complexes, pigment molecules bound to proteins, funnel the energy of photons, photons is light, to the reaction center. And so when the electrons get excited, a primary electron acceptor in the reaction center accepts an excited electron from chlorophyll A. Solar power transfer of an electron from chlorophyll A goes to the primary electron acceptor, and that's the first step of the light reactions. So if you recall, here's your chloroplast. The first part of photosynthesis is the light reactions that occurs in the thylakoids. The second part of photosynthesis is the Kelvin cycle. So these are the light reactions, and this is the Kelvin cycle. So again, big picture here. And the Kelvin cycle is where you get your glucose from the Kelvin cycle here, which is the whole purpose of photosynthesis, is for the plant to make food for themselves. So we're right here in the light reactions. And so these photosystems are embedded in the membrane of the thylakoid. So that's what we see here. And so this whole thing is called a photosystem. It has the center part that's called the reaction center, and then around it is the light harvesting complexes. The light harvesting complexes absorb light, so therefore the main thing in them are these pigment molecules. So this says pigment, all of these green circles here are different pigments. And so when we look at this, what happens is that light energy is absorbed by one of the pigment molecules. And then if we look at the arrows here, the arrow says transfer of energy. So energy is transferred from the pigment molecule that really originally absorbed the energy from the light. And then the energy gets transferred from pigment molecule to pigment molecule, eventually ending up as getting transferred to a special chlorophyll A molecule that's in the reaction center. This is the chlorophyll A molecule that once it gets that energy, the electrons get excited, and then they don't drop back down because there's a molecule called the primary electron acceptor that accepts those electrons so they don't fall back down and go back to chlorophyll A. So that's what happens in a photosystem. So I'm going to have us write down, I'm going to write some steps here with this so that we can see later on when you look at this, you can remember what in the world this picture was telling you. So step number one, I'm going to put right here. So light's coming in, and the light is absorbed by what? What's this green thing? A pigment. So step number one, light energy is absorbed by a pigment. So then next we have these arrows here, right, which it says here's the transfer of energy. So I'm going to put here step 2 by one of these arrows. It's this whole part right here. So energy is transferred from pigment to pigment. All of that energy as it goes from pigment to pigment eventually ends up with what's the last pigment that gets the energy? The chlorophyll A here. So I'm going to put here, this last arrow here is 3, all right, that energy going to chlorophyll A. So the energy eventually gets transferred to chlorophyll A. In the reaction center. So then what happens to chlorophyll A? The electrons get excited. That's right, so that's step 4 here with the electrons here. Electrons from chlorophyll A get excited. And then lastly, those electrons don't go back to chlorophyll A. What gets the electrons? Yeah, the primary electron acceptor here. So step 5, the primary electron acceptor. Let's put E for electron. Accepts the electrons. So they do not, I'll put quotes here, fall back to chlorophyll. So we don't get the fluorescing thing. So big picture here in the chloroplast. So this photosystem is in the membrane, it's embedded in the membrane. So the membrane is a lipid bilayer, so that's what this is showing you, the thylakoid membrane. So we have this photosystem. So you have all the pigments on the outside and the light harvesting complexes, and you have that special chlorophyll A in the middle that the electrons get excited and go to the primary electron acceptor. This is where that's at, all right, in the membrane of the thylakoid. All right. So that's a photosystem. So when we look here, there are actually 2 photosystems in the thylakoid membrane. Now, when we look at this photosystem, all we've got is some excited electrons. And let's review, what's the whole purpose of the light reaction? So we have this photosystem when we've excited some electrons, and now this primary electron acceptor has these electrons. What are we trying to get out of the light reactions? What's the overall purpose?
Glucose.
Yeah, we need electrons to come over here to the Kelvin cycle to make glucose. What carries those electrons?
NADPH.
NADPH. So one of the big purposes here is to make NADPH, which then is used in the Kelvin cycle. There's a second thing that's needed.
ATP.
Yeah, ATP is needed. So we have ATP that is made and is used in the Kelvin cycle. So this is what we want to get out of it. So now, something about these excited electrons are going to help with making ATP and NADPH, because that's the whole purpose of that. All right, so now we said that there's 2 photosystems. So in this big picture here, there's another photosystem that's very similar. It has the special chlorophyll A, a primary electron acceptor, and the same thing goes on in that photosystem as it does the first. So photosystem 2 functions first. The numbers reflect the order of discovery and is best at absorbing a wavelength of 680 nanometers. And the photosystem 1 is best at absorbing a wavelength of 700 nanometers. Let me explain what that means. So here are these two photosystems. Oh, I forgot there's one more bullet. And these two photosystems help the light reactions do what they're supposed to do, which is use light energy to generate your ATP and your NADPH. I'm going to come back to this in just a second. I want to show you this picture here just to show you what we're talking about with photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. So notice here, looking at this, this is supposed to be in the thylakoid membrane. So these two of these boxes here are these two boxes here. These are your two photosystems. So if we look at this, the photosystem is just like what we just looked at in the previous picture. So let's look at that. We have the pigments on the outside, and here's the reaction center. So light comes in, absorbs by a pigment, it gets transferred from pigment to pigment, eventually getting to chlorophyll A. The electron gets excited, and primary electron acceptor accepts it. So that's a photosystem. Here's the second photosystem, the same thing going on. Light coming in, pigments absorb the light, gets transferred from pigment to pigment, eventually going to chlorophyll A. Electrons get excited. So these two photosystems, the same thing is happening. So when we wrote about they absorb different wavelengths, let's see, it says here 680 versus 700. Just these chlorophyll A molecules are slightly different, and they absorb slightly different wavelengths. That's what you need to know. You don't have to memorize that one is 700, one is 680. So they're just slightly different chlorophylls, and that's what makes these photosystems different. But they call this photosystem 2 and photosystem 1 because of the order that they were discovered. So looking at this, we think 1 and 2, but it's actually 2 and 1 because this one was discovered before this one. All right, so that's what a photosystem is. So let's go back to the part that I skipped. So during the light reactions, there are two possible routes for electron flow. Cyclic and non-cyclic, and the non-cyclic is what we're going to look at first. So this is the primary pathway of electrons. Involves both photosystems and is what helps to produce your ATP and your NADPH, which is what we want to get out of the light reactions, of the overall purpose of the light reactions. All right, and so and it's called non-cyclic because it doesn't go in a cycle. All right, so the electrons flow. And so this is, all right. So tomorrow I'll talk about more of that picture.